I sat on the front seat of the truck, my face covered, trying to remain unnoticed. But my eyes kept drifting toward the driver. There was something in his gaze, something unsettling, that sent waves of fear through me. His eyes kept returning to me, studying me silently, and I began to regret my decision deeply. I should never have accepted a ride from a truck driver this late at night. The road ahead was still long, and there was no sign of any other vehicle nearby. I was left with no choice but to continue with the man who had, seemingly out of sympathy, agreed to give me a lift. But now, the way he kept glancing at me raised countless questions, perhaps even suspicions. A young woman traveling alone at such an hour would surely be misunderstood. People don't see such girls as coming from decent families. Lost in these worries, I stared out the window, clinging to the silence and darkness, when suddenly the truck jolted to a stop. My heart jumped. I looked toward the driver with alarm, but without saying a word, he got out and walked toward the back of the truck. A few seconds later, I heard the sound of several people climbing aboard. I felt as if my soul had left my body. I didn't know who they were or what the driver's intentions might be. Panic started to claw at me, and guilt overwhelmed me for putting myself in such a vulnerable position. There was a small window in the truck through which the rear section could be seen. With trembling hands, I peered through it, hoping to see what was happening in the back, but the thick darkness concealed everything. Just then, the driver returned and sat back in his seat beside me. A sharp scream escaped my mouth, but he immediately pressed a finger to his lips and motioned for me to remain silent. His stern expression only deepened my fear. My entire body shook with anxiety. I quickly fixed my scarf to cover my face properly again and turned my eyes back toward the window. Nearly 2 hours had passed since I had boarded the truck, and the driver still hadn't said a single word to me. My eyes kept welling with tears. Regret gnawed at me. I had made an emotional decision, one that now left me feeling trapped, hopeless. A new fear had taken root in my heart. Would I even make it safely to my destination? Or had I already made the biggest mistake of my life? I sat quietly as the truck rolled on, hiding my face, unsure of what to expect. A while later, we passed a roadside hotel, and the driver stopped again. I was hungry too, but I decided to stay silent. He cast a glance at me, his eyes carrying a strange glint that made my heart race with unease. He looked me up and down, slowly, in a way that made me deeply uncomfortable. Without saying a word, he stepped out of the truck. There were already several trucks parked there. For a moment, I felt a strange relief. But then I heard unusual noises, something heavy being loaded into the back of our truck. Men kept walking by, casting strange looks toward the cabin. The entire environment felt unsettling. Just then, the driver returned. He held a cup of tea and began sipping it calmly. I hesitantly handed him some money and softly said, "Could you bring me something to eat, please? I haven't eaten since yesterday." He paused, took a deep breath, and looked at me carefully. Then, for the first time, I heard his voice. "This area is not safe. We're leaving right now. You'll have to wait a little longer." With that, he started the truck again. The journey continued. The rhythmic motion of the truck lulled me into drowsiness, and I didn't even realize when I had drifted off. When I awoke, the truck had stopped again. I opened my eyes to complete darkness. The surroundings were deserted, eerily quiet, like the night itself had stretched endlessly. I looked out the window first, then turned toward the driver. A chill ran down my spine. He was staring at me again, but this time his eyes were burning red, his face twisted with something I couldn't quite understand. Anger? Desire? I froze, terror creeping up my neck. There was a hunger in his eyes that shook me to the core. He stepped down from his seat and walked around to my side of the truck. Without a word, he opened the door and motioned for me to get out. I hesitated, staring at him in confusion. "Why are you making me get down here? Please don't leave me alone," I begged, my voice trembling. But he didn't reply. He remained a riddle, unreadable, cold. "You misunderstood," he said sharply. I never promised to take you to your destination. Now walk." He led me toward what looked like an abandoned warehouse. I resisted, tried to free myself, but his grip was firm. In the scuffle, my veil fell from my face. He stared at me, startled, maybe even mesmerized. I was young, beautiful, untouched, but life had carved its struggles into my features. He seemed frozen for a moment, then snapped back and dragged me roughly inside. With a violent push, he shoved me across the room. I fell hard onto the floor. Pain shot through my body. He didn't look back. He walked out and slammed the heavy door shut behind him. Now locked in the dark factory, fear gripped me like never before. I didn't know what he wanted, what his plan was. All I could think was, have I just walked into something terrible? Who will find me now? I banged on the door with all my might, yelling, begging for help. But no one answered. The truck driver had disappeared. Exhausted from fear and desperation, I eventually sank down beside the door, my head in my hands, and for the first time on this long, uncertain journey, I cried. I cried helplessly, my sobs echoing in the silence, unsure if anyone would ever hear them. After crying for so long, my head throbbed with such pain that I wanted to slam it against a wall. I couldn't believe the mistake I had made. Something I never imagined could happen to me. I had only wanted to chase a dream, but that dream had turned into a nightmare. Lost in tears and my troubled thoughts, I was suddenly snapped back to reality by voices outside the warehouse, men's voices. I panicked. Who were they? What did they want? Then the door creaked open. 2 men stepped inside. It was too dark to see their faces clearly. Moments later, a light bulb flickered on, casting a harsh glow over the area where I was sitting. I could see everything around me clearly now, except the 2 men who remained in the shadows. They stared at me briefly and left without saying a word. I had no idea who they were or what their intentions had been. Behind me were some stacked boxes. Exhausted and scared, I leaned back against them and unknowingly drifted off to sleep. I couldn't understand why I was feeling so drowsy. Maybe it was fear, maybe sheer fatigue. I awoke to the sound of movement. My eyes opened slowly, and I saw the same truck driver standing in front of me. But he wasn't alone this time. 3 other men were with him, whispering among themselves and glancing in my direction. My heart pounded in fear. For the first time in my life, I felt truly helpless. I had faced many tough journeys and difficult situations before, but never had I felt this vulnerable. Their eyes pierced through me as though they could see straight into my soul. I instinctively wrapped my shawl tightly around myself, as though it could shield me from their intent. The truck driver stepped toward me and grabbed my arm, trying to pull me to my feet. I yanked my arm away and shouted, "Let go of me. You have no right to do this. I haven't done anything to you. Please don't punish me for trusting you. I come from a respectable family. I'm not who you think I am." He stared at me coldly and sneered. "If you're from such a respectable family, what are you doing wandering the streets alone at this hour? What kind of good family lets their daughter leave home in the middle of the night?" He pointed at the truck and growled, "Get in. And don't say a word. I know how to use force if I have to." I tried to fight him off, but he overpowered me and dragged me outside, throwing me into another truck. I scrambled to open the door, but it was locked from the outside. Panic set in again. The man who climbed into the driver's seat this time wasn't the original driver. I turned to him, begging, "Please let me go. Please have mercy." At that moment, I remembered my father's words. No matter how strong daughters become, no matter how accomplished, their honor is their most fragile strength. They can call themselves sons, but they can never truly be one. Even the most worthless man is drawn to the charm of a woman, no matter how noble or brave she may be. And that truth had revealed itself today. Whether a woman is married or not, she can never escape a man's gaze. The man next to me was staring at me hungrily. I cried silently, trying to protect my dignity, but deep down I knew I had no control over what would happen next. Suddenly, the door on my side opened again. The original truck driver climbed in and sat beside me. I screamed in terror. He was now just a few inches away. Moments later, the truck started moving. Both men were staring at me, unblinking. Where were they taking me? I had no idea. In the distance, I heard the call to Fajr prayer echoing. I began praying desperately, calling upon Allah for protection, but it felt like even my prayers were being held back. Slowly, the sky began to lighten. The darkness of night gave way to the soft glow of dawn. Movement resumed on the roads outside, and that brought me a sliver of hope. I sat silently, waiting for the truck to stop. I was exhausted after sitting for nearly 2 days. But I knew I couldn't afford to give up now. If I lost hope, I would lose everything. Time crawled forward. The morning sun poured over the horizon, spreading golden rays across the world, and with that sunrise, a small spark of hope lit up inside me, too. I had made up my mind. No matter what happened now, I would not let anyone else wrong me. I had already suffered enough in silence at the hands of my own brother and uncle. That trauma still haunted me. But this time, I wouldn't stay quiet. No man had the right to touch me, to harm me, and expect me to remain silent. Suddenly, an idea came to my mind. I turned to the man sitting next to me in the truck and said, "I need to use the restroom. Please stop somewhere." He looked at me suspiciously, his eyes narrowing with distrust. Then he replied, "All right, but you'll have to wait a bit. This area isn't safe." Eventually, he pulled over near a dense forest. Stepping out here meant risking my life, but I didn't care. If protecting my dignity required me to lose my life, so be it. The moment I entered the forest, I began running blindly without thinking where I was going. I just knew I had to escape. I had barely stopped to catch my breath near a tree when I felt a hand suddenly grab my shoulder. I spun around in shock. It was the same truck driver. My heart dropped. Sweat began pouring down my face. This trip to Karachi was turning into a living nightmare. I had no idea what this man truly intended. But this time, he gently picked me up and told me to come with him. Confused by his sudden change in tone, I followed in silence. We walked back toward the truck. I was starving after 2 days with no food, and my strength was already fading. After a while, we stopped in front of an old mansion-like house. Its colorful gates were shut, and strange writings were scribbled all over the walls. I stared at the massive building in disbelief. Something felt wrong. Very wrong. The two men escorted me inside, but I wasn't a naive little girl anymore. I immediately realized what this place really was. It wasn't a house. It was a brothel. My heart sank. I turned to the two truck drivers in horror and pleaded, "Whatever money you want, I'll give it to you. Just please don't throw me into this hell. I beg you. Please let me go." One of them snapped at me harshly. "If you open your mouth again, I'll bury you alive," he growled. His voice was so loud and threatening that I was left trembling. After a few minutes, a coarse-looking woman approached me and smirked. "She's beautiful," she muttered. I overheard one of the men call the driver by his name, Junaid. I had heard the other man refer to him by that name several times earlier. Junaid whispered something to the woman. She looked at me curiously, then shouted to two other girls, "Take her inside, make sure she's treated well." I understood now. I had fallen into a deep trap. The two women grabbed me firmly. I tried to resist, but they were too strong. They dragged me into a room and locked the door behind me. Sometime later, the door creaked open again. Junaid entered with a plate of food in his hand. "You've got 30 minutes. Eat it. After that, we're leaving you here," he said coldly. I stared at him in disbelief. His tone had no hint of mercy, no humor, no pity. He turned and walked out. Once I was alone, I waited a few moments, then ate the food as quickly as I could. I hid some in my bag, just in case. I had no idea how far they still intended to take me. The weight of my mistake now crushed me. Leaving home that night without my phone? It had been the worst decision of my life. And I was beginning to feel its price more painfully with every passing moment. After exactly half an hour, Junaid returned to the room. He looked at me and said, "We don't have much time left. Let's go quickly." I picked up my bag and followed him without asking further questions. So far, he hadn't done me any harm, but he hadn't done me any good either. His behavior was always strange. So strange that I couldn't help but feel uneasy around him. After regaining a little strength from eating, I finally asked him, "Where are you taking me? What is all this?" He glanced at me and simply said, "Just wait a little longer. You'll know soon." Time passed and the journey continued again. But this time, I said to Junaid, "I don't want to sit in the front. I want to sit in the back." He refused immediately. "There's valuable cargo in the back," he said. "You can't sit there." I tried to assure him that I wouldn't damage anything, but he didn't listen. Instead, he pushed me into the front of the truck again. It was the second day now and night had fallen. We had spent the entire night on the road. At one point, the truck stopped near a roadside hotel. I got out too. Sitting there, I finished the leftover food I had kept in my bag, all while waiting for Junaid to return. Around me were many other men staring at me with unsettling eyes, eyes that seemed to strip away my soul, but I ignored them. I had no time or energy to waste worrying about those men. All I cared about now was that Junaid returned. As soon as he did, he said, "Come on, it's time to leave." I quickly filled my bottle from the water tap, splashed my face, adjusted my scarf tightly, and started walking with him. But then, instead of the truck I had arrived in, he directed me to another one. I froze. I had already gotten into trouble by trusting one truck driver. Now I was expected to sit in another truck, with different people. As I climbed in, I realized the back of this truck was already filled with men. The driver was different too. Junaid sat next to me, and the truck resumed its journey. Days passed. By the 7th day of traveling, we finally stopped at a bus terminal. I stepped down and turned to Junaid, confused. That's when he said, "This is your stop. You're in central Karachi now. You can go wherever you want from here." I stood still, shocked and speechless. I had assumed the worst about him. I thought he was going to ruin me. I thought he was a monster, but in the end, he brought me safely to my destination. I didn't know how to thank him. I had come to Karachi with a dream of studying, but ended up getting dragged through a nightmare. Over 7 days, I had been shuffled from truck to truck, changed at least 70 times. But eventually, somehow, I made it. Still, why had he helped me? So many questions were swirling inside me. As Junaid turned to leave, I stepped in front of him. "If your intentions were good," I asked, "then why did you make me feel so afraid? Why did you do all those things that scared me?" He looked at me calmly and replied, "I knew you were from a respectable family, but what you did wasn't right. Which decent girl asks a strange man for a lift in the middle of the night?" Junaid's voice echoed with truth and bitterness. "You know how cruel this world is. Truck and bus drivers are all the same. They're just waiting for a girl to fall into their trap so they can dishonor her. If I had been one of those men, you know what could have happened to you. I have no right to question you, but I still want to know. What was so urgent that you ran away from home in the middle of the night? A daughter's honor lies in her home." His words pierced me like daggers. I had never imagined a truck driver would show me such a harsh reflection of reality. For a moment, I wanted to reverse the journey and go back home, but I couldn't. I had come too far, too close to my dream to turn back now. But I knew I needed guidance. Good advice. And strangely enough, Junaid, the same man I had feared just yesterday, now felt like my only savior. So I began to tell him my story. He took me to a quiet place and sat beside me. "Take your time," he said gently. "Maybe your story will help save the dignity of other girls too." "My name is Iram," I began. "I'm 50 years old now, but this all happened when I was just 25. I was young and full of dreams, big dreams, too big for the tiny world I lived in. My father was a laborer, my mother a housewife. We barely had enough to survive. But I kept dreaming. I wanted to study further. I wanted a future. But my father couldn't afford it. He had only one brother, my uncle, who often visited our home. I never liked him. There was something unsettling about him. He always kept my younger brother close, whispering strange things into his ears. Then he'd come home and yell at me for no reason. Despite all this, I kept studying. I managed to finish 10th grade by giving tuitions and helping my mother with chores. But to go further, I needed money, more than I could earn. One night, I told my mother, and she looked at me helplessly. "You know your father doesn't earn enough for your fees," she said. "Why don't you consider marrying your cousin? Your uncle has been asking for your hand for a long time. Maybe his son will let you study after marriage." I stared at her in shock. "You mean the boy who barely passed 8th grade will teach me?" I said bitterly. "What does my uncle even want from us? We don't have any land, no wealth. Why is he so insistent?" It was true. My cousin wasn't a bad person, but I had no interest in him. I wanted more from life. I wanted freedom. One day, I went to speak with my friend in the neighborhood. I told her everything and asked if she knew of any way I could continue my studies. She listened quietly and then said, Iram, there's no way forward for you here. You'll have to leave the village. Only then can your dreams come true. But where will I go? I asked. I have no one in the city. My father's only brother lives here, and my mother's family cut ties when she married for love. She hasn't spoken to them in years. My friend didn't have any solid advice either. She just told me to wait and think. That afternoon, I returned home exhausted. My cousin was already. Auntie told me you want to study further, that you want to make something of yourself. I was shocked at his boldness. He had come all the way into my room. Before I could even speak, he continued, "Study as much as you want. I will work day and night to support you. You can study as far as you like. I'd be proud to say my wife is educated. Just please say yes to this proposal. I promise I'll keep you happy." His blunt honesty left me speechless. I wasn't even that straightforward myself. I had always maintained modesty and limits in my words, but the way he spoke so directly completely stunned me. Without thinking twice, I raised my voice and called for my mother. Startled by my loud tone, my mother rushed into the room and was taken aback to see Shahid standing there. In a firm yet composed voice, she said, "Son, you shouldn't have entered the room like this. Whatever you had to say, you could have said it outside. Now go back to your home before someone sees you. I don't want people talking and pointing fingers at my daughter's character." But Shahid didn't leave. He said, "Auntie, I apologize. I shouldn't have entered like this. But I only came to talk to Iram and to make her understand that she'll be happy with me. I'll support her studies too." I was stunned at his shamelessness. Alarm bells started ringing in my mind. What worried me more was that my mother said nothing in response. I turned to her and said, "Mother, take him away right now before I shout and gather the whole neighborhood. I will not let anyone question my character because of someone like him." Reluctantly, my mother took Shahid outside. Whatever conversation happened between them afterward, I neither knew nor cared. I sat down, holding my head in frustration. What was going on in my own house? Everything had gone too far, and I hadn't even been informed. I thought my parents were only having casual discussions and that nothing was final. But clearly a decision had already been made without me. After sending Shahid away, my mother came back into the room, avoiding eye contact with me. I looked her straight in the eyes and said clearly, "Mother, I will not marry Shahid. I refuse to ruin my life by marrying him. Look what happened to you after marrying father. You barely managed to put food on the table. And now you want me to make the same mistake? No, I won't marry Shahid and hand over my life to a man who'll treat me like a puppet." My mother stared at me with wide eyes, her face clearly showing anger. But I didn't care. The only thing that worried me now was that my father might take this matter into his own hands. He had always been stubborn. Once he made a decision, he never backed down. My mother quietly left the room. I didn't realize then that her silence was the beginning of a coming storm. That very night, she spoke to my father. A week passed. I sat in the comfort of my false belief that maybe she had understood me, that she had changed her mind. The atmosphere in the house seemed calmer, and I thought perhaps they had given up on the idea. Feeling a bit more hopeful, I began making efforts again to continue my education. I did everything I could. I met every person who might be able to help me continue my education. But everyone said the same thing. To study further, I would have to leave the village. But where would I go? I had no one outside the village, and how would I even live there? My father didn't have the means to leave everything behind and move to the city with me. And paying rent in a city was no easy task. Day by day, my problems were increasing. But I wasn't someone who gave up easily. That day, after returning from my friend's house, I found my parents sitting in the courtyard. As soon as my mother saw me, she turned her face away. My father called me to him. I knew exactly why my mother was still upset. She hadn't spoken a word to me all week. I quietly sat beside my father, lowering my eyes. He gently placed his hand on my head and said, "Daughter, I've never asked you for anything. Maybe it's because I've always felt ashamed that I couldn't give you the life I wanted to give you. I couldn't earn enough to support your dreams. But today I'm making a request, not as a demand, but as a dying father's last wish." And with that, he folded his hands before me. My heart sank. I immediately grabbed his hands and said, "Father, please don't do this. Don't beg like this." But he continued, "Shahid is a good boy. He's been with us since childhood. We know his nature. Look, you're smart. You know we can't keep you in this house forever. One day you'll have to leave. You'll get married someday. It's better to marry someone we know. I didn't understand why my parents were so fixated on Shahid. What was it about him that made them so insistent? Perhaps that was the moment I truly realized. If I wanted to move forward in life, I would have to fight for myself. I would have to speak up for myself. So I gathered my strength and firmly told my father, I don't want to marry Shahid. I won't ruin my life like that. I don't want to give my children the same kind of life we've had. My brother was a boy. He could survive outside. But I know how I struggled for every single rupee to continue my studies. And I want to keep studying. I want to become an educated woman. I want to stand on my own 2 feet so that no one can ever force me to marry someone like Shahid. I will do what I believe is right. My father suddenly grew angry. Shahid is a good boy. I don't know what nonsense has taken over your mind. How will you even study further? Where will you go? Who will you stay with? And if you think we're going to pack up everything and move to the city for you, then you're mistaken. We won't do any such thing. If you're so determined to study, go do it on your own. Do whatever you can manage. With that, he stormed into the house. My eyes filled with tears. I was angry. What had he ever really given us that he felt so entitled to decide our future? Seeing me upset, my mother softened and came to me, saying gently, He's your father. He's only thinking of what's best for you. He's not your enemy. Try to understand our perspective. This world is not as kind as it looks. But I was too consumed by my dream of education to hear anything else. A young, beautiful, unmarried woman, alone, always needs a man's support. No matter how much you call yourself a son, you can never truly be one. The sooner you accept this, the better it will be for you. My mother's words pierced through my heart. I was devastated. I had wanted to do so much for her. I wanted to move forward in life so I could give my parents a better future. But she always weakened me by saying such things. I grew angry. I told her, I will not do what you want. I will not marry Shahid. As I turned to leave the room, I saw Shahid standing at the doorway, silently watching me. There were tears in his eyes. I was shocked. Can a man really cry? Ignoring him, I walked into my room. Later that evening, my friend came to visit. I was surprised to see her. She pulled me into my room and said, My cousin lives in Karachi. Talk to him. He'll help you get a good education there. He's even agreed to cover all your expenses. When you start working, you can pay him back slowly. It felt like a ray of hope had broken through the darkness. I didn't even stop to think that he was a strange man. I didn't know him at all. Still, I was ready to go. I asked my friend what he did for a living, and she said, He helps girls like you. He arranges education for them. I felt like a burden had been lifted from my heart. But then reality hit me again. My parents would never allow me to travel that far alone. Still, I was ready to do whatever it took to continue my studies. When I shared my concern with my friend, she said, That's for you to figure out. If you really want this, run away at night. Once you've studied and gotten a job, your parents will forgive you. Who doesn't love it when money starts coming into the house? I asked her, Are you sure he'll help me study? She nodded. Yes, of course. She then pulled some money out from under her shawl and placed it in my hand. Keep this with you. You'll need it. At that moment, my friend felt like the most generous soul in the world. I hugged her tightly and thanked her over and over again. Now I just needed a day or two to prepare for my departure. But I had no idea what storm was about to hit me before I could even leave. The next morning, my mother came to me. Her tone was distant, her behavior unusually cold. I could tell she was still angry with me, which is why I hadn't bothered trying to speak to her over the past few days. Then she said, Tomorrow night, after Isha, your nikah will be held. We'll marry you to Shahid quietly and send you off. Your father says this is the right time. I couldn't believe my ears. My eyes widened in shock. Mother, I said, you know I've refused. I've told you I won't marry Shahid. Why are you still forcing this? She snapped back angrily. If not Shahid, then who? Tell us, and we'll marry you to him, because your refusal is making us question everything. Now my own anger boiled over. Think what you want, I shouted, but I will not marry Shahid. Let's see who dares to force me into it. All day long, my father and brother were busy with arrangements. I overheard parts of their conversation and realized this sudden wedding was my uncle's and brother's doing. But I had confidence in myself. I knew I would find a way out before the night ended. By evening, the house was decorated. The atmosphere was festive. Everyone had gone to bed early to rest before the big day. But I stayed awake, exhausted yet determined. At midnight, I wrapped myself in my shawl, held the money tightly in my fist, and carried a small bag. I walked quietly to the main door, then turned once to look at the house. My heart ached at the thought of deceiving my parents, but they had left me no choice. I had hoped to convince them to let me go to Karachi, but perhaps fate had something else planned. As I stepped out of the house, I didn't even stop to think. How would a young single girl like me travel such a long distance all alone? What might happen to me on the road, I had no idea, but I shut off all my fears and crossed the threshold of my home. I barely made it out of the village. The darkness was overwhelming. Fear crept in, but I had already gathered the courage to leave, so I had to be brave now. I stood there on the roadside, waiting for any passing vehicle. After a while, I saw a truck approaching. I waved to stop it and climbed in, without even thinking that this driver was a complete stranger. As I finished telling everything to Junaid, I broke down in tears. Only now was I beginning to understand what a huge mistake I had made by leaving home like that. If I hadn't come across someone like Junaid who knows what might have happened to me, these men could have torn me apart. Junaid was quietly watching me. I looked at him with questioning eyes and said, "You seem like you want to say something." I continued, "I don't know why you helped me, why you protected my dignity, but one thing I'm sure of, your mother must have been an extraordinary woman to raise a man like you." "My mother was a wonderful woman too," I added, "but she lost to my foolishness." Junaid stayed silent for a while. Then he softly said, "What do you want to do next?" I told him I needed a phone. I had to speak to my friend and find out where her cousin was. He reached into his pocket, took out a small phone, and placed it in my hand. "Until that man comes to pick you up, I'm not going anywhere. I'm here with you. Make your call without worry." I dialed the number. My friend picked up on the second ring. Just hearing her voice brought a strange relief to my heart. After exchanging greetings, I told her it was me, Aram. I asked about my family. What she said next shook me to my core. My father had passed away from a heart attack. Tears poured from my eyes. I didn't know what to say, what to do. My whole body trembled. I asked her, "When is your cousin coming to pick me up? I'm already in Karachi." She went silent for a moment and then said, "Aram, I'm so sorry. He's not coming. He refused. He said he can't take on any more responsibility." "I wanted to tell you," she added, "but you didn't give me a chance." One blow after another, I looked at Junaid, terrified, and hung up the call. He was still silently watching me. I whispered, "My father is gone. One mistake of mine cost him his life. And now my friend's cousin. He's not coming either. He says I'm too much of a burden." Junaid gave a bitter smile. And honestly, I felt like I deserved that look. I told him, "Please don't waste your time on me. This is my fate. It's all a punishment for my choices. No one finds happiness after hurting the people who raised them. I gave my parents nothing but pain. How can I ever expect peace or success?" Then for a moment, Junaid stared into my eyes and said, "Will you marry me?" I stared at him in shock. Was this real? Things like this only happened in films and dramas. But my own life had turned into one. He added, "I have no parents anymore, but I don't want you to live without support. I want to give you a life of safety and dignity." I was speechless. He continued, "I know I hurt your trust, but I had to. At first, I wanted to comfort you and tell you that I wasn't the kind of man you feared, but seeing your age and your reckless decisions, I chose a different path. I made you doubt me so you'd experience fear and reflection. If I had just told you everything was fine, you would have never admitted your mistakes." Later, Junaid and I got married. He offered many times to take me back to my home, but my own conscience wouldn't allow it. How could I face my mother? What would I say to my brother? So I made a choice to leave everything behind and live a peaceful life with Junaid. One moment of stubbornness had nearly ruined my life, and yet I had gained nothing from it. They say parents never wish harm on their children. They always want what's best, but we, the children, misunderstand them. We act on foolish pride, and in the end, we only hurt ourselves.